and what we should say to the things that come up in our lives, even the difficult things. We should say this: if God is for us, what does it matter what is against us? As we come to Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and let's go ahead and put it up on the screen. Here's what Paul says. He says that we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him and who have been called according to His purpose. Now, before we even talk about this passage very much, I want to remind you of a couple of things. Notice it says, and we know. Who's the we? The we there, those are believers. Those are people who have trusted Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. That's not speaking to anybody. It's speaking to the church. It's speaking to Christians. It's speaking to believers. He says, and we know that in all things God works for the good. Now, it says God works for the good. It does not say all things are good. We oftentimes, and there might be someone here in this service who might have a tendency to think, you know what, I love God, I go to church from time to time, I'm a good person, therefore nothing wrong should happen to me. Nothing bad should come into my life. There are a lot of times that I will hear believers or Christians say, you know, if you just love God, He'll protect you from everything. But the truth is, this passage, this verse doesn't say everything that comes into my life is good. Christians experience tragedy. Christians experience hardship. Christians struggle with certain things. Christians get cancer. Christians get Lou Gehrig's disease. Christians go through divorce. Christians have tragedies. Christians lose mom and dads and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. Christians lose their jobs. What should we say to these things? Well, this passage, Paul says, we don't step back and say, yay, but we can step back and say, you know what, in the midst of this tragedy in my life, I know God is going to do something good. God is up to something in this tragedy. And for the believer, I think this is this passage where Paul is saying there is a reality in our lives as believers that we don't live in a bubble. Man, you think about David and Susan and Burton and Melanie. Boy, I would love to tell you, walk an aisle, love Jesus, and everybody's house gets struck but yours. That everybody loses their job but you. Everybody goes through financial crisis but you. Everybody gets a divorce but believers. But that's not a reality of life. As a matter of fact, right here in Romans chapter 8, Paul says that's not a reality in life. And so we go back to Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Notice what he says. He says, and we know that in all things God works for the good. Who? God works for the good. He doesn't say all things are good. Paul says there are a lot of things that come into our life that are flat out not good. And we acknowledge that. But we know that God works for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. So if I want to take, just kind of play off something that David said, as we think about today, and this may be for you, I want to encourage everybody to take notes because I believe this message is either for you the next time your house, whatever it is, gets struck by lightning, or this might be for you as you know another Christian, someone else that is going through a difficulty, a hardship, they're going through some sort of suffering, that you can go share this message with them to give them hope and confidence as they go through difficult seasons, or this is just something for you to pray about and encourage someone else with. So how can we live when our life's on fire? How can we live as believers with hope and confidence? Let me give you a couple of thoughts, and we're going to go through these quickly, and I want you to listen fast. Thought number one is this. We have to know that our present misery doesn't compare with our future glory. We have to know that our present misery does not compare with our future glory. In other words, the present struggle that I'm going through, for them, as you're standing there on their street and you are watching your life burn up, all the things that you have and all the things that you prize and all the things that you love, that you aren't sitting there going, that is all I have. Instead, we have to know, if we're going to live and face a situation like that with confidence, we have to know that our present misery doesn't compare at all with our future glory. Notice what Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 18. He says, I consider that our present sufferings are not even worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. What is Paul talking about? He says, I don't even consider the present things that are going on, the sufferings that are going on. For them, it was martyrdom. It was poverty. It was loss. For you, it might be cancer. It might be chemotherapy. It might be rolling through a divorce that you don't want, or navigating through life with a child that is incredibly disobedient, a prodigal, you say, the loss of parents or family or jobs or your whole vocation or whatever it is. Man, your present suffering, if you're going to have confidence to face it, you have to step back with Paul and say, my present misery doesn't even compare to my future glory. I love what else he said just a few verses down in Romans chapter 8, verse 23. Paul says, not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we what? Wait eagerly for our adoption to the sonship, the redemption of our bodies. What is he saying? There is a reality in our lives physically that we don't walk through life every day going sippity-doo day, whatever that is, right? What does it say? Do-a-day-o, whatever. We don't walk through life. There are days we groan. But then notice he goes on. He says, one day we will have a redemption of our bodies. Here's a second thought. If you want to live through tragic circumstances with confidence and faith, here's thought number 2. We have to look beyond what is seen to that which is unseen. We have to look beyond the seen to that which is unseen. You heard both of them share that. Both the Weidmans and the Blacks say that. You have to look beyond the fire and the loss to what is unseen. What does that mean? The witness I can be, my mission field, what God can do through this, how He can use my tragedy, how I can be salt and light to someone else. Boy, if you just look at the passage, look at what it says in Romans chapter 8, verse 24. Paul says, for in this hope we were saved. We were saved. It's interesting. That word, and I'm going to talk about this a few minutes ago. You don't have to memorize this. In the Greek, there can be several tenses of the verbs. That word saved there is in the aorist tense. That means the perfect tense. Basically, we were saved, we are being saved, we will be saved. And so he says, in this hope, we were saved. We're saved, are being saved, will be saved. All of it. And he says, listen, for in this hope, the hope we have, we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Here's the reality. If your hope and my hope, Paul is saying hope that is seen is no hope at all. If your hope in this life is based on your bank account or what the stock market does or what your job title is or how beautiful your house is or how healthy you are, I want you to know that's no hope at all. Why would Paul say that? Paul said that because that can be taken like that. It can go away like that. If your hope, if my hope is set only on things that I can see, it is no hope at all. But if my hope is set on things that are unseen, I can only imagine the beauty of it. What did Paul say over in 1 Corinthians to the Corinthian believers? 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. He said, however, as it is written, what no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no human eye or mind can conceive, the things God has prepared for those who love Him. He's saying, as tragic as this might be, as difficult and as hard as this might be, there's absolutely nothing that you can even compare this to. and the glory that's going to come our way. Absolutely nothing. Here's a third thought, and we just see it there in verse 25. We have to patiently persevere during difficult times. We have to patiently persevere during difficult times. Paul just continues. Remember, the whole question is, what should we say in response to these things? These are these things. There are going to be difficult times that come our way. How do we respond? With hope and confidence. I patiently persevere. What does that word patiently mean? Well, let's talk about it. Notice what Paul says. Pick it up reading in verse 25. Paul says, but if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait patiently. Now continue to read on, verse 26. He says, in the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. When we do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. What is he saying? He's saying we groan. He says, but if we hope for what we do not have yet. We wait, listen to this, for it patiently. I love what one commentator said. He says, oftentimes we think of this word patiently. We don't understand it. We think of just kind of patiently waiting around. In the original language, that original Greek word has more to do. You and I would probably understand it better translated perseverance. As a matter of fact, if you have the New American Standard, it translates it perseverance. We wait patiently really is translated, we persevere. We go through it. But one commentator said when we think of that word patiently, we think of inactivity. We just wait it out. We just kind of close our eyes, cover our ears, and wait for it to go away. That's not this word. The commentator said this word has to do with positive actions during difficult times. That's exactly what you heard from David. He said, I'd always been a call me if you need something guy. He became a will be over in 15 minutes guy. Do you understand the difference? Right? They're still in the midst of their misery. Is y'all's house rebuilt? Have y'all moved back in, David and Susan? Well, how can y'all possibly help anybody else? Except the Spirit of God. And Melanie calls, and in 15 minutes they're there. What is that? That is waiting patiently. But that's positive action. Doesn't make their house get built any quicker, but it sure gives them a purpose in life. Here's the last thought. You ready? We have to place our hope in God's faithful plan. Our hope is ultimately in God's faithful plan. Boy, when we walk into a house and you think of the Blacks and the Weidmans, an architect built that house, designed that house, and a builder built it, and you walk in and you hope it's structurally sound. You hope all of those things, but you trust it. You go in. But as beautiful as those two houses were, and as structurally sound as those two houses were, the reality of it is those physical plans can burn up and go away like that. But here's the truth. God's plans never burn up. They never fade away. They never change. I love what Paul said in Romans chapter 8, verse 29 and 30. Notice what Paul says. He says, for those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed. This word, Greek word, is the word transformed. It's metamorphosis. It changed. He changed us to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among the many brothers and sisters. And those He predestined, picking up that word back there, He also called. And those He called, He also justified. And those He justified, He also glorified. Do you notice the plan? There's the plan. The real point of this verse, and the reason why all of these verbs are in the same tense in the original Greek, is because the last verb is the emphasis. It's at the end of the day for the believer. regardless of what happens in this world, we will be glorified. Isn't that incredible to think? Whether your house burns or doesn't burn, whether we get promoted or don't get promoted, whether I live to be 92 or 32, for the believer in Jesus Christ, we will be glorified. That is God's plan for your life and my life.